What is going on, everybody out there in YouTube land? It's your boy, Nick from CWE. I'm here to break down another fantastic NASCAR race. Super interesting weekend. I'm here on behalf of DFS HQ. That's dfsheadquarters.com, at DFS Headquarters on Twitter. You can catch us there. Yeah, a lot of fun stuff going on. We're in full swing, but it's like the least fun portion of full swing. I definitely prefer the winter, the fall. I just ordered my Phil Steele magazine, so I'm super pumped, super excited about putting out some college football videos. Outside of NASCAR, I'd say that's probably my next best sport. I'm very good at the NBA. I'm very good at the NFL, but it's just there's an abundance of content, and this stuff takes a lot of time out of my day. I'm really busy. I know it sounds kind of like a cop out or whatever, but it is what it is. I mean, I'm just looking forward to it. So I'm not a big baseball fan, so the summer months kind of have me leaning towards doing stuff like NASCAR a lot. CFL will be something I play. Summer league basketball is okay, but it is still a little bit unpredictable. But really, a lot of my emphasis right now is just going into NFL season-long draft preparation. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the race. I do want to kind of take a look back at the previous week and just kind of go over a little bit. I'll give you my cash game lineup from last week, let you know how it did. And it actually did conceivably, I thought it did pretty well. It was very tough settling on a lineup last week. I was really stuck between going with Kevin Harvick or Brad Keselowski, because if you remember the video last week, I was definitely on team Stewart-Haas has speed, and they're going to tear the walls down. And Stewart-Haas sucks. They are just a lost cause at this point. Now that I've said that, one of them is going to go win the race tomorrow. But they look really bad. So thankfully, I just said to myself, take the upside of the plates differential in Keselowski. So I landed on Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, Denny Hamlin, Chris Buescher, Matt DiBenedetto, and David Ragan. And I mean, if DiBenedetto hadn't gotten into the issues, I would not have won anything with that lineup. Like, I mean, I wouldn't have taken down a tournament because Truex had, 45 more points than Kyle Busch, and that's enough. But he wasn't a very popular cash game play, which definitely saved me. But I was really happy with that. I was disappointed for DiBenedetto. I was just disappointed in general that you saw so many tires go down. Buescher was another guy. He lost a tire and he went a lap down until like right into the fourth stage when there was a caution, and he got his lap back. But you could tell the dude had a rocket ship all day. Buescher's not good enough. He's not in good enough equipment. I don't want to question his talent. Buescher's not good enough right now. And as a disclaimer for anyone who hasn't watched, Buescher's my favorite driver. I like the underdogs, but Buescher, this JTG Doherty 1.5 mile program, they have something clicking with Chris Buescher, because this is now 3 top 10s at 1.5 mile tracks this year. So it was a little bit scary because just kind of seeing how things were going and the disappointment of obviously Keselowski and Hamlin just continuously running into problems after they both, were doing so good. It was a very good race. Huge props to NASCAR for that weekend just being a top of the line weekend. It was just both weekends were really good. Races were solid. But from a fantasy perspective, I'm not going to lie, it kind of sucked a little bit. I only had like 15% Martin Truex, which was close to the field, surprisingly. I think the field was only at 18. It could have been as much as 25. And if that's the case, I might have had 18% Truex. I had way too much Kevin Harvick. That's really what kept me from being like way over the top. I mean, you'll take profit as profit, but it's one of those things where at the biggest race of the year, and we've really probably only got one race left where we're going to see massive prize pools, and that's the Summer Daytona race. I was hoping for a little bit more, but I'll take the cash and kind of go on to Pocono. Very good Xfinity race today. What a finish. And I need to kind of move back a little bit. The race itself, look, the Pocono race sucks. It sucks. It's going to be super boring because it typically has a lot of green flag runs. If it's a situation where it goes green longer than two laps, you're probably going to see it go green for a while. Restarts are crazy here. That's going to be the most exciting part of this, race, is when they do get to restart. You're talking about a situation where you could go 4, 5, 6 wide, and it's not like super tight like you see at Daytona or even Talladega for that matter. Those tracks aren't comparable. Pocono, being a triangle, kind of does have its own personality. From what I've seen out there, I think like fantasyracing.com or something like that has a chart that has all of the tracks and lists comparables. Indianapolis is something that lists like this. I'm not really looking for comparables this week in terms of tracks. I think this one, just one of those things you have to just let it be what it is. It's a track that has its own personality, its own profile. Things we should definitely be concerned about is it's 160 laps. And so that means you're talking about like 40 points for laps led. Then you're talking about 80 points for fastest laps. The problem with that is, though, you don't get fastest laps during caution breaks. And we don't have a ton of cautions. We obviously have the 2-stage cautions. I have the stats here. I'm pulling it up. In the last 5 races at Pocono, cautions 5, 4, 3, 2, 4. So we're talking about probably like an average of 4-ish, really maybe 3, not counting the stage ends. So what are we talking about? Somewhere between 5 and 7 cautions. If those stretch for like 3 laps each or 4 laps each, you're talking anywhere up to, say, like 30 laps where you're going to lose fastest laps points, and that's really significant. So Dominator points here are not really what I am focusing on. I'm not trying to figure out who's going to lead a ton in the race. I think you have to an extent. So like if you're going through the last 5 races in the fall race last year, which Daniel Suarez had the pole, and I remember this because I was captain. Denny Hamlin is going to jump Daniel Suarez immediately, and that never happened. Hamlin was just pretty much a train wreck. Didn't lead. He led 5 laps. Anyway, Kyle Busch led 52, Suarez 29, Harvick 30, William Byron 10. This race last year, Harvick led 89, Truex 31, and that's only people who led over 20. Race before that, Kyle Busch led 74, Truex led 31, no one else over 20. Before that, Kyle Busch led 100 from the pole. Erik Jones led 20, no one else more than that. And the race before that, which has to be mentioned, was a rain-shortened race. Kyle Larson led 37 laps, and Joey Logano led 38, and no one else had more than 20 laps. So we're definitely looking at a race profile here that says, for the most part, one driver, one singular dominator is all that is likely to happen here. But the problem with that is that we do need to focus on finishing position somewhat. So let's use Daniel Suarez. I think he's a great way to explain this. Suarez appears to have very little upside. He's starting 9th. But if Suarez gets a top 5 finish, there's a very, very good chance he's going to be on an optimal lineup, just because scores are going to be really low. It is going to be a week, since you're not really trying to necessarily stuff a bunch of dominators in there. I think you can make your salary spend a little more evenly. And he's a guy that all he has to do is move up a couple spots, and he's very likely to be there. I mentioned last week that I didn't think we'd really need to use any of the back runners. And Corey LaJoie, he shot that to hell. But LaJoie is a guy that has been showing speed all year. We'll get into that. Point being, with the lack of upside performances available, we didn't have any cars that have upside to go from like the mid 30s into the top 10. Our best case scenario is probably Kurt Busch or Blaney or Truex, who are starting like, and Logano. I think those guys are starting 16, 17, 19, 16, 17, 20, and 21. We don't have a bunch of guys there who can really, get into the top 10 and put up these huge monster scores. It was different for the fall race last year or the July race. I shouldn't call it fall. The July race last year had a bunch of people fail inspection. It was, it was done differently to where it was. I don't know why the name is escaping my head. Like I hear it in my head and I can't say it. Impound. It was an impound race, just like this one, but they changed how the impound facet of it works for this race. So the tech has already been completed. Guys can move to the back of the field for unapproved adjustments, but they'll still be scored from their spots. That wasn't the case last summer where you had like 10 guys fail and the optimal lineup was like Harvick, Busch, Austin, Dillon. It's just all the guys that failed and moved to the early to late 30s. So we don't have that this year. So I think it's going to be a situation where it'll probably be one guy starting in the top 4 who does a lot of damage, and then a combination of guys around that. So my strategy early on after qualifying, and I have to sit down and look at things, I don't know in cash games if I'm going to really try to find an absolute dominator. And there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of things that could happen. What if William Byron leads the entire first stage? I'm in Northeast Ohio. Like, we're not far from Pocono. It's storming right now. And the Pinty race at Pocono is in danger of getting canceled tonight and moved to tomorrow. And so the point I'm driving at is there's rain. If there's rain at the track, there's going to be a competition caution tomorrow, which means you could see someone, and he's always my favorite guy to mention, but Brad Keselowski, Paul Wolfe, they could take 2 tires or take no tires and just try to get stage points. And that takes Kyle Busch, William Byron, and kind of just shuffles all of that upside up. So I think in cash games, I'm really going to start to just, those 4 drivers I mentioned, Kurt Busch, Martin Truex, Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney, those are probably going to be the guys. I haven't tried to build a lineup. I think you could probably do it with those guys, but I really want to refrain from using anybody who I don't think can notch a top 20. I think this is a track where I want all my guys. I don't think we need a Corey LaJoie, even though if there's anyone I'm going to play, it's going to be him, just because he's starting 32nd. I think he's got mid-20s upside. If crazy stuff happens, all it takes is one accident on one of these restarts that takes out 5 or 6 cars. LaJoie is probably better than 7 to 10 of the cars already on the track. Guys who don't get in accidents are going to be ending up lap down just from tire rubs or weird things that happened, just attrition from the track. So I think early on, I'm not really going to try to figure out where the laps led are going to come from, and just those 4 drivers I mentioned, Logano, Blaney, Truex, and Kurt Busch, and just hope that all of those guys can get top 12 or above. And I think if that's the case, they should all be in that like 40 to 45, maybe even as much as 50 point range. And if you can put in enough guys around them that also have top 20 upside, then I think that's a solid cash build, and that's the route I would prefer to go than to try to figure out if Kyle Busch is going to lead 100 of 160 laps here. So what I want to do, same as we did last week, let's go through and break down all the drivers from the furthest starting position to the pole. And let's start. I'm going to group a bunch of these guys together just because I want to get them done and over with. JJ Yeley, who's a last-minute sub for Cody Ware, starting 37th. Quinn Hoof, starting 36th. Reed Sorensen, starting 35th. Bailey Curry, starting 34th. Like, these guys, I know that Sorensen and Quinn Hoof, like, they didn't do bad at the Coke 600, but the Coke 600 is just a completely different animal. We've become accustomed to weird stuff happening there. Just staying on the lead lap often enough times just is enough to get you to where you need to be. So I'm really not interested in any of these guys. In fact, I'm telling you as a guarantee, I'm going to X them out. Corey LaJoie at 5,400. I guess he's starting 33rd. So to me, he's got enough upside, I think. I'm looking at guys who can get at least 25 fantasy points as like my bare minimum for considering them this week. Just in case something does happen and Busch does lead, let's say like 100 laps, and you need Busch, Truex, Kurt Busch, and Ryan Blaney. You know, a guy like LaJoie at 5,400, if he gets to 25th place, he's got 27 points. That could be enough to get the job done. Knowing that he has the potential to float anywhere between 22 and after, there is downside to LaJoie, especially in a situation like this where he's coming off the best finish of his career that I know of in the Cup Series. I do expect him at his price to gain some ownership with people thinking, well, he could get, he could end up moving up to even 20 and he's got 13 place differential. And it's certainly possible. And that's kind of why I don't want to just write him off. Ross Chastain, 5,600, Landon Castle, 5,200. Both of these guys for me are on the cutting room floor. Chastain's he's just a guy that people play because they've seen him in the Xfinity series or a couple of times at various events over the course of the past year. He's managed to come away with lucky top 20, but I'm not doing that. This is not a track where I really feel like that's the recommended approach to take. Landon Castle really hasn't shown anything all year. So to me, no point in playing these guys. It's an easy fade. Every week I want to get my player pool as small as I possibly can, because if I am right about my player pool, the smaller I can get it, the best chance I give myself in the 100 lineups that I run to hit on something that with it just one lineup can pay for my week is what I'm out for. Matt Tifft starting 30th. Now, Matt Tifft is definitely a little bit interesting. I won a tournament earlier this year. I won the Piston with Matt Tifft, and it was just a weird situation where I needed a guy, and Tifft was just, he looked like he was the best of all of the worst guys, and he stayed on the lead lap. It was at a short track. I don't remember if it was Bristol or Martinsville, and I could even be wrong about that. It might have been a mile and a half. I just know that Daniel Suarez was a lap down the entire time, and he was like a huge chalk play, and I had him in most of my lineups. And anyway, just looking at it, Tifft hasn't been super bad. He's pulled off a couple of top 20s, and at his price, he's priced below Corey LaJoie. To me, starting 30th, having 10 place differential upside is enough to pique my interest. I don't think you're going to see like top 15 upside. This Front Row Motorsports is still really, really bad. So the speed's not there, and he's definitely a guy who we have to watch out for in pre-race tech, because he's failed. That's right, there isn't one. So he's already passed, as long as he has no unapproved adjustments. And even if he does, I think that I'm okay with Matt Tifft. I don't think I'm running him near my cash lineup. I think he's a guy that I'll take some stabs at in tournaments. I feel bad that I've talked so much about Matt Tifft and Corey LaJoie, but this is what it is. Before we go further, I was caught off guard and somewhat embarrassed, to be honest with you, last week. RotoDoc, who I don't know, like he's not someone I know, and he didn't shoot, it wasn't at me or anyone in general. Like he would just commented right when the lineups locked about how the highest owned guys in tournaments last week were like the guys who showed the most speed in final practice. And I thought that was interesting. And I kind of looked at some of the races before and did some comparison, because I tend to save information like that for use in the future to kind of see, as I'm going through and looking back on everything, why people played the reasons they played. I just want to know. And it's been kind of consistent. So especially at a track like Pocono, where I do think there is still some uncertainty about how this is going to all come together. Because remember, we haven't been, even if Indianapolis is a comparable to Pocono, we haven't been there this year. So we don't know what this package is going to do there. I think there's some potential opportunity to kind of go under on some of the guys that showed a lot of speed. Kurt Busch was one of them, and we'll talk about him. He's in a little bit of a different scenario because he did not qualify high, but it's worth noting to see if that continues, or it could be something that's more applicable to 1.5-mile tracks. We'll just have to see, but I thought that was something worth mentioning. All right, Ryan Preece starting 29th, 6,500 on DraftKings. I think he'll be a fairly popular pick. I don't know how much I love Ryan Preece. He's been okay, but I feel like I could really get potentially the same type of upside with Tifft or LaJoie, and they don't have the name value or the program value that Preece has, but both of them are starting further back, even if it's only 1 to 3 spots or 4 spots. That's a lot. I mean, especially since they're, $1,200 and $1,100 cheaper. So I'll have some Preece, but I don't think he's like this slam dunk play that is going to be the guy that you need to take everything down. So you should probably play him after I said that, because that was a pretty convincing argument against. I just think that there's other guys that I'd be more interested in playing in the price range. I already mentioned them. And there's probably still some more to come. So starting 11th, starting 28th, Michael McDowell, 6,300. So I think McDowell does have some upside here. It's probably a little bit better than Preece just because he's been around a little bit longer. He's been awful. He started the year awful. I think he's getting a little bit better right now. I do think you're kind of hamstrung with a top 20 to 24 finish with him. So I don't think the upside's super high. So that's concerning. But at the same time, this is a guy who could eke in to, like, if he finishes 19th, just as an example, if he finishes 19th, he's going to finish with like 36 fantasy points. That's a pretty fair amount of fantasy points for his price. So he's not a complete write-off. I don't know. I don't think he's going to be very highly owned because starting 27th, even cheaper after he's been running somewhat better or not as bad-ish or just as bad-ish. I don't know. The whole program is not great. David Ragan, 6,100. Ragan didn't have any tires last week, so he's kind of forced to stay out and lead the race a little bit, which is always fun. I commented in our Discord chat for the DFS HQ that I was petrified that I had like 60% David Ragan in my lineups, but that's just how it worked. And I was not upset when he finished where he did. Wouldn't have liked him to drop as far as he did, but still turned in a hell of a performance. I don't think the car is really there this week. This year, like, again, he's just, I guess he's just like McDowell, so you would play him like you would McDowell. To me, one spot makes a lot of difference, so I would definitely be willing to play McDowell over Ragan and over Preece. I don't know if I'd be willing to play Ragan over Preece, especially, again, considering I think there could be some recency bias there where people look at what Ragan did last week and maybe not think that he's going to do the same thing again, but increase what I like to call their just-in-case shares. And people like to do this a lot. People like to, play somebody who is coming off of an unexpected finish just in case they manage to do it again. Bubba Wallace starting 26, 5,900. I want to pull for Bubba. Bubba had a very fast car last week. I was very overweight on Bubba Wallace. I was very upset because even after he managed to go, somewhere between 2 or 3 laps down, he was still running like he had a 17th place car. And starting 29th last week, he would have been the nuts play. There's no question about it. Although with LaJoie finishing how he did. That's not exactly true, but he's a guy that wouldn't have hurt you ultimately. They've got a new sponsor for 16 races, or another sponsor for 16 races. I feel like I want to keep pushing with Bubba a little bit. I don't think you're going to have to go that high on him because there's a lot of compelling plays starting further back around him. So I think you're going to see his ownership slide back into maybe even as low as the single digits this week. I'll have some, but it's not going to be a ton. Ty Dillon 6,700 starting 25th. I think at a track like this, Ty falls into this 20 to 25 car. And again, we've got guys cheaper and starting further back than him that fit the same type of profile. I'm not going to say Ty Dillon can't go out and get a top 10, top 12 finish. I think his highest finish here was 17th. He does have a 17th and 18th place finish in 2017. I like playing Ty. I just don't know how much upside he has. Again, starting 25th, there's guys that have a similar profile, maybe with a little less upside than Ty, starting behind him. I will probably have lower ownership on Ty this week than I have in weeks past. Chris Buescher starting 24th, 7,300. I don't have a good feeling on Buescher this week. The car looks okay in practice. Buescher's never a guy who practices well, it seems. We know he's been a monster on 1.5 mile tracks. He can definitely be a monster on the super speedway tracks like Daytona and Talladega if he's able to stay out of accidents. He has done well there in the past. He has a win at Pocono. I would really hope nobody would use that as a statistic because that was all a strategy play and not actually racing to win the race. It was just getting out front right before the race got called. I'm a big fan of not playing. I'm a big fan of not playing guys just because they're guys I'm a fan of, right? There has to be a better reason behind it. We've seen his upside. I mean, I don't know that he has top 10 upside at this track. I still have a pretty decent amount of research to do. This was just I wanted to get the video done while my wife was busy putting our child to sleep so I could actually have a little bit of a home life, which I haven't been able to have for a while. Tentatively, I am going under on Buescher. Tentatively. All right, Daniel Hemrick, starting 23rd, 5,800. Just don't see Hemrick being a guy that I want to be overweight on. 20 to 25 car, and I'm just far more compelled to play the guys starting a little further back than him. If he was starting 28th, I would have had a completely different story. But as we're getting closer to, the 20th position where I think he's very likely to ride tomorrow rather, on Sunday when the race happens. How about that? I'm probably not going to have a ton of him. I'm really not seeing a bunch of upside there, so I'm going to kind of hold off a little bit with him. Matt DiBenedetto, 6,900, starting 22nd. Unfortunately, I think he had to change an engine, which means he's going to the back. And look, going to the back, as we've seen this year, is not like the death sentence. But it's not the greatest thing for a guy like Matt DiBenedetto, who hasn't exactly been the luckiest guy to begin with. So, especially recently, mostly recently. So, with that being said, I think he makes a very compelling tournament play because I do think there are going to be a lot of people that are just like not playing DiBenedetto. First of all, 22 is kind of high for him. That's about his running position this year. We have not seen a ton of finishes where he's been above that. So that starting spot doesn't have a bunch of baked in upside to it. It's got a ton of downside, especially having to drive through, the field on a crazy restart. I'm going to take a very low stance on him, but I understand the reasons for playing him, but I more understand the reasons for not playing him. Kurt Busch, 8,800, starting 21st. Kurt Busch was one of my favorite fades last week. Look, Kurt Busch is what he is. The honeymoon's over. He's a guy that's probably going to finish like 9th through 12th. And if he's starting 21st and he's under 9K now, that's good enough for me. Like I said, if he finishes 10th, he's going to get around 40-some fantasy points, 42 fantasy points, whatever it might be. Nothing wrong with that. Absolutely cool with him getting that at that price, because just get ready. That's going to be one of the higher scores of the week. We're not going to have a monster final score for the winner. It's not going to be like a Daytona where you can get a 30 place differential points for some of these cars, or a Coca-Cola 600 where there's so many laps led and fastest laps, it's all the scores just get inflated. This is a tight race that's going to finish with like probably 100 dominator points after cautions and things like that. So that's going to be good enough. Martin Truex Jr., 10-9, starting 20th. Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. have been damn good at this track. So I'm not looking to fade Truex for any reason. I think I couldn't understand, to be honest with you, why you wouldn't want to play Truex this weekend. I mean, he's a guy starting 20th who could lead laps and win the race. The end. He's been the best driver in NASCAR. Kyle Busch started out the year like that. Torch has been passed. It's Martin Truex. And this shit happens. It happens a lot. It happened all last year. It went from like Harvick to Busch to Truex to Keselowski, and Logano did what he had to do in and around that, winning races and finishing high. But right now, Truex is locked in, so I don't desire to fade him. I do think starting where he's starting, he has a potential to be the highest owned driver this week. He definitely does. Ryan Newman, 7,400, starting 19th. Really like Newman here. We need some of these guys in this range. I think that at the price, I'm really hoping people just pound Buescher. I mean, I know that sounds strange, being that I'm a fan of Chris Buescher, like a big fan of Chris Buescher, but I'm really far more interested in Ryan Newman, because at the end of the day, I think Newman has the veteran guile to know what to do at this track. And I could see Buescher finishing in like 17th, 18th place, but I could see Newman like coming near a top 10. So like Newman a lot too. Starting 18th, 7K, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Love Stenhouse. I think that he's a fringe top 10 car at a track like this. He's going to be aggressive on the restart, so he's going to be one of the guys, if possible, going 5, 6, 7 wide if they can. He's going to do what he can to try to get to the front. He looks so much better. He looks better this year than he definitely than he did in 2018, but I think he looks better this year than he did the year he won at Daytona and Talladega. So I don't know if a win's coming for Ricky Stenhouse, but I think he's going to be sporty here. Next up, starting 17th, 8,900, Ryan Blaney. And Blaney has sucked. They've not been good. We've definitely heard this year all about Kyle Larson and his troubles, but I'd be remiss if we didn't sit here and talk about how bad things have gone for Blaney. Tires down, pit road mistakes. I heard last week was a combination between they thought a tire was going down and they were pitting because they thought there might be a caution. If you're that late in the race on a 1.5-mile track and you're pitting because there might be a caution, there might be something wrong with your program. Like, you need to win. Okay? Even if the tire was going down, just race it. Just race it out. There wasn't that many miles left. If the tire pops, you're done anyway. If you pit and there's no caution, you've taken yourself out of the race, which is what you did anyway. So I'm not sure where any of the logic sits there. I'm not in the control position for a NASCAR team, so I don't know what it's like. I've never driven a car, just like I've never played professional basketball, professional football. But at the end of the day, we still sit here, we watch all of these things, we analyze these things. I'm very concerned about how Ryan Blaney's team is put together right now. I'm not so sure that Penske is the right organization with him, especially since his teammates see no issue whatsoever with trying to wreck him, apparently, as both Logano and Keselowski attempted to do last week. But Blaney is a good driver, starting 17th. He's done reasonably well, including a win on this track. I don't want to start playing the he's had a bad year game. Like, I'm a tournament player. I take some risks. I'm not going to sit and pretend that I don't, right? Blaney's a guy I think I'm going to take the risk with a lot this week. Joey Logano, 9,500, starting 16th. I mean, obviously, I'm going to play some Joey Logano. Like, he's starting 16th. Again, another top 10 car. I don't think there's a reason we need to talk much more about it. You know, he's a guy who could lead the race and win. End of the story. All right, starting 15th, 8,500, Alex Bowman notched his 4th straight top 10, not counting the All-Star race. I like Bowman. I mean, look, when you're driving, Hendricks has speed. There's no question about it. So with that being said, I just don't see the reason for, not playing a guy on a team that's got speed and is motivated. I don't see the point in not playing him. He's going to be, I don't know if he's cash game viable because the price has come up. He does not have that history like Logano or even Blaney have in terms of, getting up there, leading and winning races. But he's sporty and he wants to win, so I got to have some exposure. Paul Menard starting 14th, 7,100. This is a spot that I hate this week for Paul Menard. Like, I'm a little bit upset, I'm not going to lie, because Menard may be the most difficult driver in NASCAR to figure out. He really might be. He's a 15 to 20 car, maybe 15 to 22 car. But every once in a while, he's a top 10 or sometimes a top 5 car. And I'll say this almost every week, especially on super speedways, but that's just the way it is. I've long stopped trying to make a reason to take Paul Menard out of my player pool in tournaments. There's no rhyme or reason to him. Just because he starts 25th doesn't mean he's a guy you need to play, because he could easily finish 22nd. Just because he's starting 14th doesn't mean he's a guy you need to avoid, mostly because of price. He's 7,100. If he creeps toward the top 10, there's a good chance that that's all it's going to take for him. Sitting where he's at right now, starting 14th, if he cracks a top 10, that's 38 fantasy points. It might not get you to the top of a tournament, but it is not going to hurt you. So I will probably try to figure out what I think his ownership will be, which, if I had to guess this week, all things considered, I would probably put it at 10 to 15%. I think you can get some guys just a little bit cheaper and a little bit more expensive that have a little more upside. I'll probably hover around that 10% ownership mark on Menard. Eric Almirola, 8,100, starting 13th. I mean, I want to believe that Stuart Haas has a top 10. These are still top 10 cars. He's kind of in a dead zone price-wise where I'm just looking at some of the names around. I'm tempted to just X out this whole zone. I really like a lot of the cars starting in the late teens and early 20s. Tournament only. Yeah, I mean, you can't really look at Almirola as being he's a top 10 driver this year. And right now, at least, Stuart Haas has a lot of problems. Chase Elliott, 9,900, starting 12th. I like Chase. I think Chase has a good potential at a top 10. He's been leading a lot of laps in races. And I can't stress enough how big of a deal that is, because even if he moves up to 1 and drops back down to 6th, the boy's starting 12th. So he's already going to have like 6 spots of place differential baked in to dropping back after he leads. Those are going to be important points. Leading laps for guys in this range is the difference between them making it and them not. That's really what it comes down to, especially for guys like Elliott and Harvick. And Harvick's next. He's starting 11th. He's 10-5. He's probably been the best driver, period, at Pocono. He's never won. I wish he had won the pole. Because if he had won the pole, I would have literally just X'd him out and gone on my way. Starting 11th. Yes, he's still the 3rd highest priced driver on DraftKings. The upside is pretty low because he could easily finish 10th or 12th, and that's it. I mean, Truex is $400 more, and if he moves up to 15th and Harvick can't get into the top 10, I'm pretty sure Truex is already well past Harvick. Kyle Busch is nothing's ever a lock, but I would bet that Kyle Busch leads at least 20 laps here. So you have some baked in upside with Kyle Busch. I think Kyle Busch will still get a fair amount of fastest laps. Based on my algorithm, I have Kyle Busch finishing with 20 fastest laps. So that's 10 points right there. Harvick's tournament only. He cannot be on your cash game radar right now, period. Austin Dillon starting 10th, 7,700. Austin Dillon's been a guy that I've advocated for I'm not necessarily going to say advocated. Austin Dillon has been a guy that I've made the point that, look, if this happens, then that. It's a classic if this, then that. If Austin Dillon stays in the top 10, Austin Dillon is probably going to be on a winning lineup. Austin Dillon has basically been an 11-14 driver this year. He's had some ups and downs. I think they got wrecked out last week. He's a deep tournament play only, and he's probably a guy that's not going to generate much ownership because, again, guys a little more expensive or a little less expensive in better spots. Stenhouse, Newman, but those guys come to mind. Kurt Busch isn't too $900 more than him, or $1,200 more than him. Same goes for Daniel Suarez, $7,900, starting 9th. Suarez has decent limited history here, but I'm really hesitant to give much more ground to like that limited history because there's plenty of guys who are much, much better than Daniel Suarez who have like a 50% success rate of being in the top 20, let alone the top 10. So I'm not really ready to sit here right now and crown Suarez as being a guy who I think is a safe bet. You know, he showed speed last week. They got in a lot of trouble. It didn't work out well. You're not going to hold that against the guy necessarily, but I think at this point I'm I'm skeptical about their upside. Jimmy Johnson, 8,300 starting 8th. I actually haven't looked at practice in terms of like the 6th lap and stuff because this is such a weird track. I don't know if they do 10, 15, and 20. They might do it in smaller increments or whatever, but I'm hoping he had really good practice times because I definitely want a reason to fade Jimmy Johnson. I know he's coming off a top 10 at Charlotte, but he was starting 15th. Starting 8th, I can't. The only way in the top 10 I want to use Jimmy Johnson is if he's leading, just because I know that when he falls back, he's at least hopefully got some fastest laps, and laps led to kind of bolster the loss of position. Kyle Larson starting 7th, 9,700. Another unlucky situation for Larson, was running his tail off, got really high up there, maybe even as high as like 3rd, and just got shuffled back on a restart. I think it was the restart that put Buescher back on the lead lap. And he ended up causing the accident that took Austin Dillon out, maybe took Clinton Boyer out, or at least put Boyer really far back. Larson's an aggressive guy. This track, you would think, could fit a solid profile for a guy like him. And him and Stenhouse, they're really, really aggressive, especially on restart guys. So I'm not going to write Larson off completely. He's priced way too high, like 9,700 for a guy who has like a top 5 finish this year. And really, he sucked last year too. He wasn't very good last year either. He didn't win a race. He was just like an average driver last year. So I have a lot of hesitations, and I think I'm like a lot of the NASCAR community who we know that we know that Kyle Larson is a very, 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 very good driver. Like, might be one of the best. But man, it is becoming increasingly difficult to come up with reasons and excuses to try to cover how things have been going. There's a lot of unpredictability in NASCAR, but when your unpredictability has now become predictable, that's a problem. Denny Hamlin, 9,300, starting 6th. Hamlin's like such an interesting character at Pocono, because when he started, he was the first and only rookie to ever win Pocono in his first race and sweep in his rookie season. He was the guy at Pocono. Like, there was no touching him until they repaved it. And when they repaved it, I don't even think he's been able to notch a top 10, or maybe the fall race last year, maybe the July race. I got to stop calling it the fall race. Maybe the July race last year was the first time since the repave that Hamlin finished 10 on the dot. So here's the argument that I want to kind of put out there, okay? Hamlin did better before it was repaved. A lot of the drivers are saying the repave is starting to go away. Does that make Denny Hamlin a better driver, or has he had to adapt for such a long period of time to the new pavement at Pocono that the magic that he had back then has worn off? It's an interesting conundrum to think about, because if it reverts back to what it was, that the language that Denny Hamlin understood there, I would want to have a stake in Denny Hamlin, because he's a guy who could definitely lead some laps. He's starting back far enough that you get those extra few place differential positions, which on a slate like this can be huge, right? That's like 6 place differential points or 5 place differential points plus like 12 point differential for finishing position. That's a lot. Hamlin's another guy right now. I'm either going to go way overboard on Hamlin, or I'm going to just have like a 5% just in case share. I don't see myself like being in the middle of it. I really see myself with a very heavy stance on Denny Hamlin one way or another. Brad Keselowski, 10-2, starting 5th. He's been the magic man as of late. He's been in a bunch of weird situations that he's been able to pull himself out of and get close to the front. He led a bunch of laps in Charlotte before they had a tire go down, which really sucked, because I was way over the field on Brad Keselowski, who started 21st. And we know this guy is a fringe championship 4 driver every year. And he was still woefully underowned because he didn't show good practice times. This week he did. So I do think there's a good shot that Kez will see a pretty good deal of ownership. Right now, my stance on Kez is I think I'm going to be underweight on him. Part of it is playing the ownership angle. Part of it is just, he's run really well lately. And I know this is incredibly stupid, but I'm a firm believer that there's enough variance in NASCAR that you can't just be great all the time. I know he did just have issues, but I don't know. I need some more time to think about him. I really do. He's priced high enough that taking a stand on him and missing it is going to be crippling. Let's just put it that way. when you're up there as the fourth highest priced driver and someone misses on you, that's the nail in the coffin. Last week it was. If you went Harvick over Truex, you were dead on arrival. That was it. The race started. Kevin Harvick looked spry for 20 laps, and then you were like, shit, I made a really, really bad decision. And I don't know how Stewart-Haas can come out there and say that Harvick looked good for 300 laps. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't under the influence of anything. I didn't see that race. So I don't know, that could be part of their issue, that they sucked, but somehow thought it was only for the last 100 laps, which certainly was not the case. So it's the same situation this weekend. You're going to, in playing Keselowski, you're going to opt to not play someone like Kyle Busch, who's starting on the front row, who has, a less experienced driver next to him that he could very easily overtake. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but in theory, he can. Harvick, who has great history on this track, and he's starting, 6 spots back, so he has a little more upside. And then Truex, that's starting way back and has been a monster on this track. Keselowski, I think, could be a guy. I think if I'm calling it right now, I'm probably going to go really underweight on Keselowski. Erik Jones, 8,600, starting 4th. Just like last week, Erik Jones has been super sweet at this track, and we saw how well that did him being the first person eliminated from the Coca-Cola 600, and I have a shit ton of him last week. Thankfully, I did not opt to play him in my cash lineups, because that could have been a fucking disaster. That would have been the end of the day for me. Having a lot of exposure to my cash lineup and really finally feeling comfortable in that again kept me from losing last week. So Jones has tournament upside. Again, he's a fringe outside contender to win this race. Those cars have been fast, but there's a lot of downside. I mean, he's priced high enough that if he drops to 7th, that it's going to be meaningful. Clint Bowyer starting 3rd, 9,100. No, thank you. I am not playing Clint Bowyer. I don't care how fast he is. I'm off Stewart-Haas right now. I'm not doing it unless these guys are at least out of the top 10, but preferably out of the top 15. I could be way wrong, and this could be the week that they get it right. But there's just not a lot, in my opinion, to look at. What's his upside? He's 9,100. He's not cheap. Kurt Busch is $300 cheaper, and he's starting 18 spots back. They both probably have relatively similar finishing position upside. Let's just be honest. It is what it is. I mean, you really need Bowyer to go out, lead laps, and finish in the top 5. It's possible. I'm not going to rule it out. I'm not saying Bowyer can't do that. But, Bowyer's not been a top 10 guy here. Bowyer has 2 out of 26 attempts finishing in the top 5. It's not something that makes me warm with confidence. So, I don't know. I think I'm probably going to be almost completely off Bowyer this week. Kyle Busch, 11-4, starting 2nd. Kyle Busch needs to lead laps, and he has been. He has been. But it's tough. And you have to just remember, at some point, Kyle Busch is not going to have a great finish. He was a second highest scoring driver last week at 86 fantasy points or something like that. He'd need to outright dominate the race to do that this week. And I don't think that's going to be a big issue, him not getting to 86 points. That's not what I'm saying here. But I'm saying that there are laws of averages that say it's highly unlikely that someone is just going to have a top 5 run or top 10 run every week and lead 20 to 40 laps. If he has an off week and he doesn't lead laps and he finishes 12th, done. You're just done. Dead. Don't even look at the lineup, because unless there's a miracle situation where Truex, Harvick, and Keselowski have done worse, then you're probably not sitting in a very good position. So this is a really tough. I think this is another one of those points where like you just have to make a decision. You can go all over Kyle Busch and you can say that, it's pretty clear that William Byron is not as good as Kyle Busch. Pretty decent shot that William Byron can't hold the lead for long. We already are suspecting that there could be a competition caution. I'm actually going to jump up right now and look at Bob Pockrass to see if he has reported anything about a competition caution tomorrow. So the Pinty series has been postponed until, so I don't see anything about a competition caution. I'm assuming there will be. There's rain. That benefits Kyle Busch. It really does. He's got probably the best pit crew in NASCAR. So I'm going to try to just go slightly under the field on Kyle Busch so that if he does go ham, I'm not completely decimated. But I don't really love Kyle Busch this week. I'll say that. I'm much more interested in playing the combination of Truex and Logano based off of their place differential upside in a race where, unless Kyle Busch leads like a significant portion of the race, if he leads 60 laps and Logano finishes third, there's a good shot Logano outscores Kyle Busch. So I think I'd rather be invested in the guys that are starting a little bit further back this week. I think that we are unlikely to see like a one dominator race. I think that it's going to be a bunch of guys leading 30 to 50 laps. And one of those guys I think is going to be the pole sitter, William Byron. I think Byron has, 10 to 20 lap lead, 10 lap, fastest lap upside. I think he'll finish probably somewhere between like 6 and 10. If he can lead enough of the race and eat some of those laps led, that's going to add to his total because he's not expensive. He's priced under Austin Dillon. This is a guy who now has like 3 or 4 poles this year. That's nothing to scoff at. I know that we actually want to see them win races, but I think there's enough upside here. And maybe some of this is just going back to last year with Daniel Suarez on the pole. And I know Hamlin was starting second. I got to see. Erik Jones was third. Hamlin was second. And Kez was fourth, and I was just convinced that one of those 4 guys. So we're looking at a top 4 this time of Byron, Kyle Busch, Clint Bowyer, Erik Jones. That does not set up that much differently than what we're looking at with Suarez. And Suarez held his own, finished, I think he finished second. He led 29 laps, and he put together 54 fantasy points. Kyle Busch had over 100 that race, but they started 28th. See what I'm saying? There's a huge range of differences for guys like Truex and Logano than there is for Kyle Busch if Byron leads and if this is not a single dominator race. And that's just not saying that Kyle Busch maybe doesn't have a great car. You never know. So my take on this weekend, I really don't know where I want to go for a pick. If it's going to be like a name brand driver winning, I'm going to go with Kyle Larson getting off the schneid. I think this is a potential upside spot for him to where he can, get around. He hated his car in first practice. They said it came around a lot during second practice, and he was one of the first guys to run laps, I think, during qualifying. So I think there's some merits into saying that this car is pretty fast. I just don't want to predict another like chalk winner. As far as outsider guys, there's 3 guys really on my radar. Erik Jones, Daniel Suarez, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I think all of those guys for kind of different reasons. I think Jones has a fast car. I think Suarez is just getting better and he's sly enough to kind of see an opening. And Stenhouse is just flat out aggressive. So those are guys I'm really looking at in tournaments. Those could be guys I may be overweight on, but I'm not guaranteeing that I'll be overweight on. Stenhouse, I'm guaranteeing I'm going to be overweight on. Everyone else has enough downside, though, All right, if there's any questions, feel free to attach them to the video. I have no problem answering questions. I'll be checking the video all the way up until the race tomorrow. Good luck. Hopefully someone wins something big. We'll see you then.